This morning, I want to talk about the notion that moderation is a deep practice. We often don't think of it that way, but in the teachings of the Buddha, this principle of moderation is really central to the path. It's encapsulated in this doctrine of the middle way, which advises us to avoid the extremes of indulgence on the one hand and clinging to indulgence and asceticism on the other. But moderation is just not merely a superficial act of restraint, which is the normal way we think of it. Instead, it's a profound practice that can touch every aspect of our lives, and it requires on our part mindfulness, wisdom, and a deep understanding regarding the nature of existence. And so to walk this path of moderation is to cultivate balance, cultivate harmony, and cultivate clarity. And when we do that, it enables us to navigate all the challenges, all the complexities of this life with skill and compassion. And you probably remember this, but the middle way was born out of the Buddha's own life experience. Before he left the palace, before his enlightenment, Siddhartha lived as a prince, immersed in luxury and indulgence. Every sensual pleasure was met and taken care of, and it just wasn't working for him. He snuck out of the palace, he saw suffering, and then he ended up leaving his father's palace and becoming a wandering ascetic. And he subjected himself to extreme deprivation, as the story goes, skin and bones, wearing rags, walking around what is now northern India. But neither the indulgence at his father's palace or the asceticism for the years that he wandered reduced his suffering. And so he discovers this middle way, and this is a balanced approach. And through that, he attained freedom. And that's the role model that he offers us. And this is the place where wisdom and equanimity reside. This is the place, moderation is the place where it's not simply about avoiding indulgence or excess or practicing asceticism. It's about recognizing the causes of suffering and choosing a path that helps reduce our suffering. Gives us some freedom from our suffering. It is the practice of tuning our minds to discern what is really beneficial and what merely just feeds fleeting desires and attachments, just temporary sensual desires. And through moderation, we learn to let go of what binds us and embraces what truly nurtures our spiritual growth. And as I said a moment ago, it requires mindfulness. It requires the ability to be present and aware of our thoughts, feelings, and actions, because otherwise we're going to slip into indulgence, or we're going to slip into deprivation, whichever direction we take. Without our mindfulness, we are easily swept away by impulses, by desires, that's a big one, and by habits of the mind, old habits of the mind. For example, when we eat mindlessly, we may overindulge. We just keep eating. We just eat not even when we're hungry. We harm our health. But when we pay attention, when we eat mindfully, we listen to our bodies. We recognize when enough is enough. And this same principle applies to every aspect of our life, every aspect of the Eightfold Path: speech, work, relationships, and even our spiritual practice. Because we see the consequences of our actions more clearly, we make wise choices. We avoid causing harm to ourselves. We avoid causing harm to others. We avoid causing harm to the planet. We cultivate a sense of balance, which leads to greater peace and contentment. That's the promise of the path. So moderation is not about denying ourselves pleasure, suppressing our desires. Of course we want that. But we want to be skillful about it. We want to engage with life in a way that fosters well-being, that fosters harmony with others. And in order to practice moderation deeply, we have to develop wisdom. We can't do it without wisdom. Wisdom arises when we understand, not just intellectually, but really in our gut, the impermanent and interconnected nature of all things. It allows us to see that clinging to extremes, whether craving on the one hand or aversion on the other, leads to suffering. For example, and we talk about this frequently, excessive attachment to material possessions is just a fleeting thing. It can create a sense of emptiness, of dissatisfaction, because ultimately we're disappointed. The novelty wears off. And on the other hand, extreme renunciation leads to the bitterness about self-denial. Wisdom helps us navigate these extremes, to walk the middle way. It teaches us to embrace moderation as a dynamic process. We know that life is changing constantly. So what constitutes moderation in one moment may not be the same in another. That's where our wisdom, discernment, and mindfulness come in. We can't just, put it on autopilot on moderation and just cruise through. We have to be engaged. So for instance, the balance we need in our work-life schedule may shift as circumstances evolve. My balance now is very different than when I was working full-time. So what I'm saying here is that moderation is not a fixed rule. It's a living, breathing practice that adapts and must adapt to the ebb and flow of life. When practiced deeply, moderation leads us to greater peace. It leads us to greater freedom. We sit right there in that middle way. It frees us from the tyranny of extremes, whether that tyranny is restless pursuit of pleasure, constantly seeking, constantly grabbing, constantly clinging, or the painful self-punishment of denial. I can't have it. I must not do it. I got to just white knuckle it. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha states, quote, "The wise who practice moderation dwell in peace like the calm of a sea. The wise who practice moderation dwell in peace like the calm of the sea." And this peace arises because moderation allows us to live in harmony with ourselves, with others, with the world around us. Just think of all the baggage that living in harmony lifts off our shoulders, all the preoccupations, all the distractions. Through moderation, we cultivate this core sense of sufficiency. So instead of constantly striving for more, we appreciate what we have. Most of us are incredibly fortunate. I mean, our cup overfloweth. And this contentment with what we have reduces greed. It reduces envy. It creates a space for gratitude and generosity. Moderation also strengthens our relationships. Because if I'm not always demanding something of you or clinging to how you should be, I'm more likely to foster patience, kindness, and understanding. And when we approach each other with moderation, especially with our expectations and judgments, we create conditions for trust and mutual respect to flourish. But despite its many benefits, I do not want to leave the impression that moderation is an easy practice. It requires vigilance. It requires self-awareness. We have to set an intention to walk the path with moderation. And it also requires humility to admit when we have strayed too far one way or the other. Golly, I just messed up. I really got caught up in wanting that new toy, that new iPhone. And in a world and a culture that glorifies excess, whether it's the pursuit of wealth, power, or pleasure, choosing moderation can really feel countercultural. And right now with the with the billionaires in charge, I mean, that's really, we're really swimming against the stream when we talk about moderation. We may face criticism and misunderstanding from others who fail to see the value of restraint, the value of living more simply, the value of balance in our lives. But understand that the challenges of moderation are opportunities for growth. Each time we consciously choose the middle path, we strengthen our resolve, we deepen our understanding of the Dharma. We're living it, we're breathing it. And over time, the good news is moderation becomes less of a struggle and becomes more an expression of our natural internal wisdom. It's a deep practice, as I said at the outset, that causes us to live with intention, with mindfulness, and with wisdom. And it's not a denial of life's pleasures. We'll still have them, but we'll engage with them skillfully and compassionately, not with excess. Because by avoiding the extremes of excess on the one hand and deprivation on the other, we find a path that truly leads to freedom, peace, and contentment. It just makes life simpler. It makes it a heck of a lot less complicated. Because in a world of constant distractions, constant temptations, moderation actually offers a refuge from that, a way to live with clarity and purpose. I don't have to, read every ad, surf the internet on Amazon to see what new toys I want to buy. Just caught up in that craving, that clinging, that seeking. To practice moderation is to honor the middle way, the timeless teachings of the Buddha. And it turns out when we walk this path, this middle way path, it becomes a journey of self-discovery and transformation. We learn to let go of what does not serve us, what does not help us, which does us potential harm, and embrace what brings true fulfillment. In this way, moderation becomes more of a practice. It becomes a way of being, guiding us toward a life of balance, of harmony, and eventually of spiritual awakening. So that's moderation is not a simple path.